How do you develop leadership? How do you develop character? And so we turned to our doctrine in the military. We always keep things simple as we can in the Army. And we actually had a fairly robust doctrine, leadership doctrine. And it boils down to 3 words. Be, know, and do. So if this is a person that we're trying to develop or change or cultivate, right, it's those 3 words. And basically all that doctrine says is there are certain things you need to know how to do. There's certain skills you need to be able to do. And there are certain ways that you need to be if you want to be a successful leader. And then we looked at ourselves at WestPoint and we said, you know what? We know how to do that. We're one of the most benchmarked training institutions in the world. We know how to train skills. We know how to do that. We also looked at this, the knowledge part. We said we're a top-tier college. We're a top-tier educational institution. We know how to educate knowledge. We know how to inform. So knowledge and skills, we knew how to do that. Harvard knows how to inform you. How to increase your capacity of knowledge and skills. But you know what? Knowledge and skills are perishable. What you learn today, if you don't use tomorrow, it's gone. And what we teach you today, if the world's changing, continues to change as fast as it is today, is it may not be relevant tomorrow. So while it's not totally unimportant, here you're spending 4 years trying to increase your knowledge and skills, the know and the do. The leverage for me, the insight we had at WestPoint back in the early 90s was, it's all about the be. Be. Who you are, your character, your values, your worldview. That's where the leverage is. Give me somebody who's got the be part right, I can teach him or train him to do anything. But then the challenge, and if you're a little confused about the be part, I brought one more video clip to show you what I think we're talking about here. And you see I draw wisdom wherever I can find it. This I call the happy greeter. I can't believe it. With 5 kids, and after about 10 years, my wife finally convinced me we need to go on a cruise. I mean, the last thing I thought about was getting all 5 kids on a boat out in the middle of the ocean and just like, anyway, she's the boss. We finally went. The last day of the cruise, I got my son Sean, he was about 14 at the time, to bring the home video camera down and videotape this young lady. She's the greeter. For those of you who haven't been on cruises, she stands outside the cafeteria. That's all she does. She's the lowest paid customer-facing employee on the ship. Okay? And she greets, well, you'll see what she does. She just greets you as you go in and you come out. She's the lowest paid. She's not even in the tip pool. You know when tips, right? I mean, so this is the lowest facing employee on the ship. I want you to watch what she does and think in the back of your mind, can you train and educate this? Here's the greeter. Can you train that? No, that's the be. That's who she is, right? I mean, you got to hire that. That's who that person is. You can't train something like that. So, of course, it's the last day while Sean is going out videotaping her, and you know, on the last day before we leave, I'm down with the customer service rep on the ship, and I introduced myself. I'm Scott Snook from the Harvard Business School. He goes, "Oh yeah, you want to talk to me about our greeter?" I said, "How'd you know that?" He said, "Oh yeah, people always want to know about the greeter," and he tells me she's the lowest pay. You know, they do these customer satisfaction surveys at the end of a cruise. It's when you're bunked the last morning. He said, over the last 3 years when she's been the greeter, all the great people, customer service people on the ship, lowest paid customer-facing employee in the ship, 3 standard deviations of the mean. She's the one that's most mentioned about the crews in the in the feedback that they get after each ship. So, can you train that? This is what I'm talking about when I talk about the B part. And so, the 3 verbs in the WestPoint mission statement: educate, train, and inspire. We know how to educate, we know how to train, but it's this third one. It's the B part. That's what this course is about. As best I can tell, talking to Tal and looking at the syllabus, it's about who you are. And that's where the leverage is. And it's also about what we call the third verb at WestPoint. Educate, train, yeah. But what about inspiring you? What about raising your sights to do great things? And so we started redesigning the WestPoint experience to emphasize the third verb, to be more inspirational. And if you have a chance to read the article, I think, that I gave to Tal, you can see some of the ways we started changing. Cemetery walks, reflective essays. And so we're trying. We're trying to do better. We're not there yet. But speaking about inspire, and I want to keep moving here, here's a guy who knows a little bit about inspiration. I was down to see him. And these 2 guys, there's Mike, there's Coach K. Mike Krzyzewski is a cadet at WestPoint. Anybody recognize the gentleman next to him? That's Bobby Knight. Bobby Knight was his basketball coach when he was a cadet at WestPoint. And so we go way back. But before we get into the inspiration and the last story I want to tell you about that Mike gave me last week, hopefully, I want to just share with you some of the more recent research that we have here on leader development. If my computer decides not to lock up here. Here we go. So there's Bruce Avolio. He just wrote a book called The High Impact Leader. He's out of the University of Nebraska. And I just want to take one quote out of this book. And they did this huge meta-analysis, looked at all leader development interventions last 100 years, everything we know about leader development, and here's the bottom line finding. The largest developmental impact was raising the positive beliefs of followers, instilling in them the conviction that they were better at a performance task than they thought. Looked at 100 years of leader development interventions, 100 years worth of studies, 2,100 studies, boiled down to 201, did a meta-analysis, a statistical technique that takes all these studies, combines them, and figures out what they learned from all the studies, and this is the bottom line finding. Another piece of research done by a colleague at Gallup organization, University of Nebraska as well, Marcus Buckingham, just came out with this book. And out of this book, I'm going to clip through just a few quotes in Marcus Buckingham. He talked about the one thing you need to know about leading and managing. Here's the first one. I know you talk a lot about self-awareness in this course. It's important for your development. Self-awareness is a good thing. People who have a realistic assessment of their strengths and weaknesses outperform those whose assessments are inflated. In short, unrealistic self-confidence leads to a fall. I mean, that's conventional wisdom, right? You become arrogant, too much self-confidence, it leads to a fall. Conventional wisdom. Recent research, see what you think about this. It suggests that accurate self-awareness rarely drives performance, and that in many circumstances, it actively retards performance. Only self-assurance drives performance, even when this self-assurance turns out to be unrealistic. Kind of provocative. Next slide. Your job, when you're in a leadership position, your job is not to provide people with a realistic picture of the limits, so says Buckingham, of their strengths and their liabilities, of their weaknesses. You're a manager, not a therapist. Your job is to get them to perform. And so while understanding our strengths and weaknesses is important for our own development, when you're in a leadership position, he's arguing that it's about performance, not about self-awareness. Pretty provocative. And in short, he says, the state of mind you should try to create in them is one where they have a fully realistic assessment of the difficulty of the challenge ahead of them, and at the same time, an unrealistically optimistic belief in their ability to overcome it. Pretty strong statement. Know the challenges you're facing, but believe in an unrealistically optimistic way that you can actually do it. So I want to show you a short clip